So now I'm going to take a moment and introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Ratey. Dr. John Ratey is an associate clinical professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He is a research synthesizer, speaker, and best-selling author. As an internationally recognized expert in neuropsychiatry, Dr. Ratey has published over 60 peer-reviewed articles and 8 books published in 14 languages, including the groundbreaking ADD, ADHD, Driven to Distraction series with Ned Hallowell. With the publication of his most recent book, Spark, The Revolutionary New Science of Exercising the Brain, Dr. Ratey has established himself as one of the world's foremost authorities on the brain-fitness connection. He serves as adjunct professor at National Taiwan Sports University and is Reebok's ambassador for Active Kids. Recognized by his peers as one of the best doctors in America since 1997, Dr. Ratey and his work are frequently profiled in the media, where he's been featured on ABC, CBS, NBC, PBS, and NPR, as well as in the New York Times, Newsweek, The Washington Post, U.S. News and World Report, Men's Health, and other national publications. So now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Ratey.
Thank you. Yesterday afternoon, I was at another venue for smart kids with learning disabilities. That was the MIT Media Lab. I'm very serious. The fact is, we wouldn't have the computer if we didn't have dyslexia, ADD, and autism, or the spectrum, okay? And I've been in this area for a long time, actually from the very beginning of my career, back in the 70s and 80s, working with autistic kids, and adults mainly, and studying them. And I'm sort of circling back to that, and I'm working with what I call my NASA group at the Center for Discovery in upstate New York, where we have 365 adolescents with severe autism. And it's fun to be back because the people I'm working with are just out of this world, researchers. And you can't hear? Oh. What? Oh, okay. Okay, I'll address it this way. Yeah, no, and I think what we've known, and that there are a lot of kids out there, a lot of adults as well, who have such gifts, and we need to expose them and bring them forward. And I think we're moving in that direction, but we're no longer just relegating kids to, oh, they're stupid, they're contrary, they don't get it, they don't know how to interact. But we're making a difference, and I think exercise of all sorts is one way that we're doing that. And this is my book, this is my dog, these are my websites. That's my Facebook, partially funded all the time by Reebok. Before that, Johnson & Johnson supported me going around the world and pushing the agenda of getting people healthy again. And a big part of that is exercise. I have a new book coming out, which you should all order today on Amazon, called Go Wild. And it's a complete look at how we should be living in terms of our hunter-gatherer genes. And as you'll hear in just in a little bit, we're still hunter-gatherers. And we need to pay attention to that, and we don't. And there we look at everything, exercise for sure, but diet, sleep, mindfulness, nature, being in nature, hugely important, and small tribes, connection, all the things that are so important to us as beings. And it's coming out in June, but you can order on Amazon. But anyway, I've been traveling for the past 7 years around the world and talking about the importance of exercise in our lives, the importance of exercise to help us regulate our emotions and optimize our cognition. There's two things that are so key and crucial, and there's nothing better that we can do than exercise. Physical exercise, aerobic, anaerobic for sure, strength training, balance training, yoga, all the types of exercise. And what it does is it works on our brains, and that's what I'm about. So we know we used to move all the time. When we were hunter-gatherers, we were moving 10 to 14 miles a day. And as you can see, this is a famous slide from the internet, we are not moving. We are sitting. And it's one of the reasons I think we're seeing such an increase in lots of, certainly the top 10 killers in the United States, and our healthcare budget's out of control everywhere because of our lifestyle differences that we've sort of evolved. So we're 37% of our kids are overweight. A lot of them are not moving. We're cutting out exercise in the schools. So, and happily hearing about the schools here, we're re-emphasizing it, and especially for our learning challenge kids. 25% of our kids in school today can be diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. 25%, huge numbers. A large part of that, I think, has to be attributed to the lack of our kids getting out there and playing. You know, even in gated communities where everything is protected, kids are sitting inside. The parents are out running or playing games, but the kids are playing games inside on their video games, right? Or texting, or just watching a million channels on TV. So with that, we see this rise in the percent of kids who have generalized anxiety disorder and depression. Huge amount of depression in our kids around the world. And it's a real problem. Now we know, we're beginning to know why exercise works, what it does. We know a lot about its effect on the neurochemistry, and we're beginning to learn its effect on remodeling the brain. Exercise actually remodels the brain. It changes the brain. There's nothing that prepares the brain to grow and change better than physical exercise. Nothing. Drugs, other kinds of learning, meditation, yoga, being in love, all those are important, okay? All those are big effectors. The safety, you know, the attachment, all those things help, but exercise gives it a much bigger boost in terms of creating the right environment for what's called neuroplasticity. If you all heard that term, you should emblazon that term on your brains, neuroplasticity, because that means our brain's ability to change and grow. And the only way we log in information is if we have our brain cells grow. And that's what, and exercise provides the right environment in our brains for that to happen. Now with anxiety, we're drilling down, that's what I like to say. You know, when I first started with the ADD, we knew, my God, all of our kids and adults who exercised, their ADD seemed to be gone for that period of time. Our marathoners, when they continued to marathon and train, they didn't have ADD. But as soon as they got an injury, bingo, they got depressed, and then they showed up with adult onset attention deficit disorder for the first time, and that's part of the reasons why we wrote Driven to Distraction. That sort of generated our interest in it because they couldn't run anymore, or they weren't moving anymore as much as they used to. So they were self-treating, they were self-medicating, that's what we call it. But now we're looking at, okay, what happens when you're, in a chronically fit state, where we know all kinds of changes occur in your brain. It's harder for your sympathetic nervous system, or the arousal nervous system, to get turned on if the degree of fitness that you have. You actually change that. So, and now we know, even in looking at certain cells that we grow, and one of the things you'll hear is that there's a process called neurogenesis. Has everybody heard that? Or well, anyway, neurogenesis means growing new brain cells. And we grow new brain cells every day, and things like learning, things like the other activities like meditation and being in love and feeling safe help grow more new brain cells, specifically in an area of the brain called the hippocampus, which is the sort of grand central station for memory and learning. And it's the first thing to go when we get into cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease and all those ravages on our brains. But so we know that this happens now, and exercise promotes it better than any other activity. And we'll get to why. But just right up front, just last year, we began to, this is how we're parsing it apart. We're seeing what new cells are being made in the hippocampus, for instance, and what they contain and what they do. I mean, we're getting down to the single cells, which is amazing. So Elizabeth Gould at Princeton, who really in 1999 broke the fact that we humans also grow new brain cells every day. We didn't know that before, okay? So she and her group did this study and showed and looked at what kind of new cells we're getting in our hippocampus. And a large proportion of them produce a substance called GABA, which is the brain's major inhibitor. Now in the hippocampus, we know in the past 10 years that this is the organ where most of our cortisol binds, their stress hormone binds to cells there, and GABA helps put the brakes on being overly stressed and going into fight or flight syndrome or panic episodes. So we're really getting to the short hairs, if you will. And we know about depression. We know that it's a huge problem, and we've known about it for a long time. Hippocrates wrote about it. That he said, and this is 300 years before BC. He wrote and said, if people come in depressed, what is his recommendation? Go for a walk. If they come back and they're still depressed, he said, go for a walk again. Keep on walking, okay? And that's really, really important. Okay, so now, we've been into attention deficit disorder for now 35 years, and writing about it, talking about it, thinking about it. And this is an old slide from long ago, the typical hyperactive kid who was just here a second ago. So, and one of the reason why I bring Jack along, my Jack Russell, is because the whole breed has attention deficit disorder. Okay. So when I got Jack, I took him to the vet. The vet said, Ritalin. So instead of that, no, I developed an exercise program for him, not just for a walk. I have a hill in the back of in the back of my home. Took 3 tennis balls out every morning, threw them up the hill, one at a time. He'd go up and come down, he wouldn't give it up, but then I had another one. So what the heck was he gonna do? So then I threw that up the hill and he goes tearing up. So he got his exercise in very quickly, sprinting. And so after that, it produced what I call the Jack effect. It's the Jack effect. And he could take notes for me, you know, and wasn't, you know, playing, you know, doing bad things and getting into trouble, because he certainly could. So then when we have no recess sometimes, we have this occur, and we see it with our kids as well. Then right up the road here in Baltimore, you have our new archetype of ADD kids. Michael Phelps, most of you may or may not know the story, but Michael was diagnosed at the age of 9. He was an Energizer bunny, getting into trouble at school, not doing well in school, and his mother was a middle school principal, or was, and that didn't go very well in the principal's house, you know, for her son not to be, not to take charge. And so he was put on Ritalin at the age of 9, but his mom still thought he needed more, so she started him swimming. And then by the age of 11, he was swimming 3 hours a day, and they both decided he didn't need the Ritalin anymore. And we all know the rest of the story. And if you followed his life, you know what happens when he stops training. He gets into trouble, right? Just like Jack. And there's studies showing that, you know, looking at things now that that running on the treadmill, both in rats and humans, is as effective as Ritalin for improving attention, improving, and it's from all over the world now. Then this happened to come out from South Korea now some time ago, but we're getting to see this in kids and measure that. We just did a study in Natick, Massachusetts, where we had 5 kids who had ADD, and we started a bike program and measured all kinds of stuff for a semester. And they reduced their Ritalin or Adderall, whatever they were on, or some weren't taking it, and their scores went up, their grades went up, their performance went up, their involvement in school went up. So now that's expanded, and we're doing a big study out in Sacramento. But we know that, like, especially in the morning, that exercise is really important to wake the brain up and to get the kids ready for learning, ready for participating, decreasing the anxiety, improving all the parts of the brain that are involved in reading, in math, in all the things that those kids on the games were using, visual spatial skills. All that gets pumped up with exercise, you know, because the brain is all connected. And when you exercise, and I'll repeat it again, when you exercise, you're using more brain cells than in any other activity. Our brain, and I'll get to later, but our brains evolved to help us be better movers. That's over the 500,000 years that we evolved as hunter-gatherers. We added parts of the brain, the front part of our brain, on. It grew, and that front part of the brain gradually added in language, and then we began to have these wonderful executive functions. First, about predicting, imagining, sequencing, remembering our movements. What was the most effective? Where was that berry patch? How do we push a mammoth off the cliff? Those kinds of issues were all because we were growing this part of the brain to help us be better movers. We got language, we use that same part of the brain to think. And so when this part of the brain specifically, when we move, we turn on a lot of parts of the brain, but especially the prefrontal cortex. And people were just at an executive function conference. This is where the action is for executive function. That's the last part of the brain to evolve, and it evolved to help us really be planful, evaluate the consequences, all the things that our ADD and dyslexic kids need help with. It also, when it gets turned on, it puts the brakes on our impulsivity, getting too active, fidgeting, getting out of your seat, and it improves working memory. Now, all this stuff is not just idle chat, right? Idly sort of observing in a few cases. All this is many, many studies in animals and in humans, and it's all over the world now. We're getting data from everywhere because it's a big, big deal about exercise and its effect on the brain. Unfortunately, this is the way we think about exercise. It's something we do if we go to the gym, or it's contained, it's not part of our lives. That's what's so tragic about what's happening with our kids. They aren't outside playing, they're inside, because we have such great devices. It's such great technology for them to get addicted to early, like we all are. I mean, who doesn't check their cell phone at least twice a day, or maybe 6 times a day, or 3 times an hour, you know, to see if, and you know what you're doing there, right? You're seeing if anybody loves you, or if you're still important, or, you know, see, oh, and you get what I call a dopamine squirt. Dopamine is the reward neurotransmitter. So you're checking that, say, oh God, is somebody, am I still important? You know, and then you get an email, even if it's spam. Oh, wow. But this is what we have to do, is to bring exercise back into this kind of model, to have our kids, you know, and this is what's missing. This is what's missing today. It's really missing in our kids. Why? Lots of reasons, but one of them is lawsuits. You know, I mean, you know, and that's, I mean, I've talked to many schools where they've closed recess down because they're worried about lawsuits. You know, tag is a sexual assault, you know, and you know, and people get sued for pushing the kids down, or, you know, and breaking an arm, hurting a wrist. That happened all the time. That's life. Go skiing, you know, and see what happens. I mean, you know, it's part of our lives, and we in recess, that's what will happen, and certainly here. But that joy of movement, that joy is really forgotten, and the kids aren't aware of it, even, and that's what's so tragic. So we have to rebring that, and one of the programs that evolved from Spark, and then we got Reebok involved, is a program called BOKS, B-O-K-S, which is a program before school. So the kids come in an hour before school to essentially play, vigorous play. This is K through 5, okay? And it's now in 890 schools across the country. 890 schools, and it's going to be very big in Canada. The Canadian Football League is going to support it, but Reebok has been getting it started. Kathleen Tully, who started it, is now all over the world, but getting kids to come in early, volunteer as of yet. But what we did was when we, in our first year, we had 1,500 kids that we canvassed after they had been in this program for 12 weeks. They come in 3 days a week, usually 3 to 5 days a week. In Washington, there's a whole bunch of public schools that are using this. And they come in 3 to 5 days a week, usually 3. And we canvass the kids afterwards. And 96% of them wanted to do it again. Now think about that. They have to get up an hour earlier to go to school that day. And they want to because they're playing, they're running, they're jumping, they're doing the crab walk across the yard or the gym. They're doing stuff that we always used to do. And just smiling and laughing and supporting one another and mentoring one another and reducing bullying, reducing aggression, because that's what we see. And I'll get to some of that. So now what does exercise do? Exercise changes the brain chemistry immediately. Immediately. My standing here, rather than sitting, increases my brain's competence by about 7%. This comes from the dyslexia, early dyslexia treatment or interventions. And one of them was to have the kids stand while they read. Remember that? Well, and then they saw that the kids could do better standing while they read. Why? Think about it. What happens? They have to use the large skeletal muscles. They have to use the core muscles. That reciprocally affects the brain, turns the brain on, and then it's more present. My standing rather than sitting, my focus is better because I'm liberating, because of the activity of those brain cells, I'm making more dopamine and norepinephrine and serotonin, which are the things that Prozac and Adderall or Ritalin release. All of our psychiatric drugs are keyed in on these neurotransmitters, norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin, or most of them. And today we're getting into GABA and glutamate and all that, but these are been the things in psychopharmacology where we've been addicted. And all these neurotransmitters are immediately raised when you're exercising or when you're using your muscles more than being at rest. And these have an effect on everything that is important to us: concentration, alertness, energy, motivation, and memory, and also helps keep in check our impulsivity. Keep in check our impulsivity. Also, we know, most people who paid attention to exercise and what it does have heard the word and the endorphins, which are endogenous morphine. We have our own morphine in our bodies and morphine receptors, and that's one of the reasons why OxyContin and heroin are such a big scourge today, because we already have those receptors for them. And we get into the addictions, and then it feeds those receptors, and then we can't live without them. But we make endorphins when we're exercising. And so this adds to the feeling of reward, of feeling good, of feeling complete after you've exercised. But we've also learned in the past 15 years about another substance that we make in our bodies and in our brains, called the endocannabinoids. You know what cannabis is? It's marijuana. So we have marijuana factors in our bodies and in our brains. So when we exercise, we release both the endorphins and the endocannabinoids, as well as all those neurotransmitters. So think about it. We're doing a lot of work. Plus, there's this stuff that we learned about now years ago called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. And it's made every time a nerve cell fires. We turn on the genes when we fire a nerve cell, turn on the genes back in the nucleus to say, we need to make more of this stuff. Why? Well, this stuff is what I called miracle grow for the brain. It is brain fertilizer. And it helps our cells do all the things they're supposed to do, preventing, erosion, but also getting our brain cells up and ready. So by running and playing and exercising, we make more of this stuff than in any other activity, any other drug. And believe me, people have been looking at ways of increasing BDNF, or biotech companies, when we began to learn how important it was, not only for brain health per se, but for depression. It's an antidepressant. It's an anti-anxiety agent. So all these factors we change when we're exercising, and when we exercise for chronically, that's what I call it, we change the chemistry of our cells. We make them more likely to make this stuff, and we may more likely to make more receptors for this stuff. So we make our can tougher. We build it like a muscle. Today we think of our brains as muscles. So you can affect the brain by exercising, or you can use our wonderful pharmacopoeia and help the economy move. Now, I got into this finally putting Spark together when I learned about this school in Naperville, Illinois. It's the first chapter in my book. It was an epiphany, for sure. And I learned about it because, for a variety of reasons, in 2003, because they were getting national attention. Because of their 19,000 kids in their school district, 3% of them were overweight. The average then was 33%. 7,500 kids in their two big high schools, not one obese child. Why? Well, they had, over 20 years, had evolved a PE program that was second to none in the world, because it was based on fitness, on individual fitness. They started by throwing out the balls, and they were just running and had running games. It's calisthenics. They didn't have much equipment. And then after 2 years or so, Phil Lawler, who started it, realized that he was still giving the better grades to his athletes. So he said, we got to figure a way to get all the kids and evaluate them in a reasonable kind of way, because we want every kid moving. So he slapped on heart rate monitors on each kid and gave them their grade for the amount of time they were spent in their cardiac training zone. So all of a sudden, the geeky kids, the kids who were discoordinated, could get A's in PE. So one family who moved into the area, who knew they had a kid that was discoordinated, came home with an A in PE, and he called the school and was complaining, is this just grade inflation? And so, but anyway, so this became a huge issue, because we were at the beginning of the obesity crisis, or in the midst of it. But what really got me is that 2 years before this, 99% of their kids took the International Science and Math Test, the TIMSS test. Some of you may have heard of it. We take it every 3 years, and we rate, all countries in the world rate who's the best. Well, they took it as a country, and they came in number 1 in the world in science and number 6 in math. The US is usually in the mid-teens somewhere, and we're dropping. But so even though they spent 45 minutes a day, every day, in fitness-based physical education, their scores, they were among the best students in the world. And it's a middle to upper middle class school, but the same things happens when we transfer this to other school areas. And Naperville continued to look at reading, continued to then, I mean, this is the PE staff, right, who started doing research on the effect of exercise, and especially in the reading challenge kids. That was their first target. So they started a program which they called Reading Readiness, learning readiness, physical education. So they had first volunteers come in to have a very intense program of physical education, of running and playing, an hour before school, before they had their reading readiness course to help improve those poor learners. And they found that the kids who participated doubled their improvement over the other kids. So then they began to have it for all the kids who were in the reading readiness program and the math readiness program. They eventually went there to have them have this very intense PE program before they had these special classes. And they found that all the kids improved twice as much as expectations. And then they did some fancy things, shifting around the reading readiness and the math readiness to later in the day. And they found that they didn't do as well. But then they switched the PE class before their sixth period class. And they, again, improved twice as much as those kids who weren't participating. So they really did science, or attempting to do science, to show that this helps. And one of the things that we see when we go into schools, especially schools that are more contain your kids, the learning challenge kids, or schools without much resources in the inner city, a bunch of schools here, for instance. And what we see is the following. When we get in and we begin to change introduce PE on a daily basis, but fitness-based PE, what we find, the first thing that happens is a drop in discipline problems. The very first thing. And it's not because you're getting the kids tired. Okay, it's not because of that. What you're doing is you're turning the brains on, and you're having the brain self-regulate better. And we see a decrease in bullying, an improvement in class participation, and something that the country as a whole is worried about is we improve attendance to school, you know, and in through high school. And we get away from this negative feeling that so many of our kids had to go through before they found something like the programs we heard about already. But so this is an inner city school. We went to the inner city schools in Kansas City first. This was an elementary school. Switched up from once a week PE for 90 minutes to 5 days a week, 35 minutes before school. Had the kids mainly run, do some calisthenics, had some Dance Dance Revolution machines, and also had some bikes and stuff, and they did it every day. Well, they evaluated them pre and post. There was a great improvement in their fitness scores and a fitnessgram, which is a measure of fitness. But what really turned everybody on was there's a 63% drop in disciplinary referrals throughout the school. And the principal was mighty happy. And this it sort of got viral. And the superintendent was having it in many different schools and seeing the same kind of effect. And then, of course, he got fired. And this is the problem with schools. You have to have schools that really have a culture change, where it has to be embedded in the culture, that this is a demand from the parents. And because otherwise it goes away when you get the advocates to leave, and then the teachers are so darn pressured by what I called no child helped at all. And, you know, which was a great idea, but no money. You know, that was the big problem. It's a great idea. But in any case, and then we did this other school early on down in Charleston, South Carolina, where most of the kids were from very broken families, difficult circumstances. We started a morning program, for 30 minutes or so, because I only had one PE teacher, one gymnasium. She worked with the middle school right away, kids, 125 of them, and set up all these stations in the gym. So when the kids would come in, they could divide up and go to one station or another for 8 minutes, and then they switched every 8 minutes. So in one station they played basketball, in another they did double jump rope, in another they did pogo stick, in another they did cup stacking, and all these, and then they had some Dance Dance Revolution, cheap machines that they used, and so they got through 3 stations every day. Well, what they saw in the first 4 months compared to the year before was an 83% drop in discipline problems throughout the day. This was remarkable. The teacher satisfaction went up, the student participation went up, eventually grades went up, then test scores. So, and in Charleston they have a bulldog who's the head of PE there, who continues to push it. So then now there's 12 schools in Charleston, South Carolina, especially the underprivileged schools that are having a daily physical education based on fitness. Now, by that, you don't throw away PE, you bring the balls back in, which they did at Naperville, but they have 3-on-3, 2-on-2 games. Everybody's playing all the time. There's no losers. There's no one not picked. Everybody's important. So you get all the kids into learn and participate, because too many of us remember PE as a time of shame and humiliation, right? That's what it was for many kids that were discoordinated, that were geeky, that were not interested, and so by getting those kids up and moving, you change the world. And this is another school up in Ontario, a high school, lower middle class high school, where they had established over the years a special classroom for their 25 bad boys, because they were pulling the most expensive resources out for these kids. There are 25 bad boys where they're trying to keep them in school. Devoted teachers. So the quarter before we came and helped shift the program, they had, of those 25 kids, they had 94 days of suspension. We started with their participation a very vigorous exercise program. They helped decide what they were going to do as well, because these were in high school kids who were really tough, living on the street, some of them. But anyway, it really had an effect, because the next quarter they dropped to 5 days of suspension. So they weren't fighting in school, they weren't giving everybody such a hard time. Things were different. And they dropped their absences in half in 1 quarter. Okay, so this is what we say. What happens first is you turn the brain on to self-regulate. So you don't get all the jumping around and fidgeting and all of that. And then there's one of the elementary school teachers out in Fort Collins, Colorado, had come up with this program that he called time in versus time out. So when a kid is having a trouble in the classroom, maintaining themselves, instead of sending them to the principal, they would have them go do some exercise for 5 minutes on an exercise bike or on one of those urban rebounders, which is a small trampoline right outside the classroom, for 5 minutes. They'd be jumping up and down or running up and down the stairs or on the exercise bike, not because they wanted to tire them out, burn off energy. What they did is they were turning their brains on. Then the kids learned, oh, I can manage myself. And 5 minutes? Oh gosh. And then one of the things that we talk about is having breaks during the school day, brain breaks. And that's been very popular. And it's something that all schools should have, especially with anything like a 90-minute class, which is crazy. But these brain breaks are exercising at this desk. 4 minutes. You don't have to move. And what you can do is have kids dance, and it's helpful if the teacher participates, because that's the only way the kids will think it's worthy. So you have the kids jumping around, doing jumping jacks, doing push-ups, doing squats, doing anything to get their heart rates up, and it changes everything. Then they sit back down and get into control again, and push onwards. Okay, so anyway, I'll leave you with this thought, I guess. I always talk too much. But the brain evolved to help us be better movers, okay? Just remember that. So when we move, when we exercise, we are turning and we are using more brain cells than in any other activity that we do. More brain cells. More of our brain is being engaged, being turned on, being built, being toughened, if you will. And that's the way our brains evolved. And so oh gosh, I'm getting a little ADD. This quote I love: "That which we call thinking is really the evolutionary internalization of movement." Okay? We use those same cells that we evolved to be better movers. That's what executive function is, to be more directed, to be more predictive, to be more sequential, to evaluate consequences, to sculpt our movements, the same way we sculpt our learning. And I want to show some others here. Just one more slide for you all. This picture, I think, was on the cover of the Washington Post Sunday magazine some years ago. This is Ernestine Shepard from Baltimore. Have you heard about her? Yeah, so she's shaking her head. Okay, Ernestine at the age of 56 was obese and was a couch potato. And she had never exercised much. So, but then she said, I'm tired of not being able to fit into clothes. So she started running, then she started going to the gym, and here she is at 74. And she works in Baltimore works to increase the elderly getting involved in exercise. Now, even more impressive is my buddy here, Mr. Singh. And some of you may have heard of him. At the age of 80, he had never exercised. His wife died. At the age of 81, his son died. He got very depressed. He went to the doctor said, start running. Here he is at the age of 100, finishing the Toronto Marathon. He retired last year, finishing the Hong Kong Marathon at the age of 101. And he said, I imagine it was like Forrest Gump, who said, I'm tired. But my point about this is it's never too late. And our studies for preserving our brains and not getting into cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease, most of them look at people who start exercising in middle age and see preventing cognitive decline by 10 to 15%. And there are some groups that find preventing the development of Alzheimer's disease by as much as 50%. So, and that's starting in middle age. okay, whatever that is these days. I haven't got there yet, so I don't know. So anyway, thank you, and we have time for questions. Thank you.